The conflict in Palestine goes back over 100 years, with the Jewish people trying to reclaim a homeland and the Arabs set on stopping them. The conflict has created several wars with atrocities from either side. Today the two sides still battle for the rights of the land, with constant terror attacks and raging argument. The United Nations started playing a role in the conflict directly after World War II, taking over where the League of Nations left off. Although the UN has tried to implement resolutions to reduce conflict, their only use has been as a mediator. To better understand why the two sides are so connected to the area, one must first look at the area's history. After Moses freed the Jews from Egyptian rule, they travelled until King David conquered Jerusalem at around 100 BC. Jerusalem was very important to the Jews, as they believed that is where the Prophet will appear and save the world. Empires came and left the Palestine area, but around 135 BC the Romans were in power. The Jewish people continually rioted till 135 AD, when they were banished by the Romans. Ever since, the Jewish population has stayed small. The Romans were succeeded by the Arabs, with the city of Jerusalem becoming important to them when the Prophet Muhammad used it to ascend to heaven. Being a minority, the Jews tended to move through Europe being persecuted. This led to them having a low position in society. Though, in the early 1800s, the change in social class brought the Jews out of the ghettos. This brought with it the ideas that they could form a homeland in Palestine. The Jews never felt at home in Europe and always felt like they belonged in Palestine. The movement was known as the Zionist movement. Small groups started to form everywhere and lobby for a Jewish state in Palestine. At the end of World War I, the Middle East was divided between England and France. The British received the area of Palestine as well as the area known today as Transjordan. It was the Zionist lobbying that persuaded the British to push for a mandate known as the Balfour Declaration. The aim of the mandate was to give the Jews a homeland with the creation of self-governing institutions. The British would use this to increase their power in the area. The Arabs opposed the declaration, creating anti-Jewish propaganda and promoting rioting. With World War II nearing, the British put a white paper in place to please the Arabs. At the end of the war, the international community was shocked with the discovery of the Holocaust. 6 million Jews had died at the hands of the Nazis, severely damaging the Zionist plans of forming a majority in Palestine and leaving thousands of Jewish refugees all over Europe. The power of the Jewish movement had been lost, but international support was gained. Guilt and sympathy for the Jews are the two reasons that the Jews received so much support in the UN to create a homeland. In early 1947, Britain claimed that the mandates were no longer working and gave the problem on to the UN. The war had taken its toll on the strength of the British and the conflict was escalating. The international community was pushing for a homeland so they had somewhere to send Holocaust survivors. One of the most powerful supporters of this was the United States, which had been subject to lots of Jewish lobby. With a permanent position on the Security Council and being the biggest money donor, the US was a powerful country to have support the Jews. This support gave the Jews the power they needed in the UN. The UN decided to send a committee to decide on a solution for the area. This would be the first independent body to examine the issue. They held hearings in Jerusalem, but the Arabs boycotted them as they were opposed to any sort of Jewish homeland. The committee decided to partition the area. The country was first split into Palestine and Transjordan. Then Palestine was split into Israel, that was given 55% of the land, and Palestine that received the other 45%. It is widely believed that this was an unfair split as they were considerably more Arabs than Jews, but the land that the Jews received was only a portion of what the British mandate offered them. It was only mostly desert with little useful resources like water and very hard to defend. Considering this, the Jews accepted the petition, but the Arabs did not. The resolution was voted in with more than a 60% majority. This did not mean the petitions would be put in place, as Britain said that it would not enforce anything that both sides did not agree on. A UN resolution does not have any legal obligations. Mitchell G. Bard from an online source wrote, "They represent the political viewpoints of those who support them, rather than embodying any particular legal rules or principles." In summary, this source says that UN resolution is a recommendation and not an order. This is why when the Arabs declared war on the Israelites, the UN could do nothing to have them stopped. Aside from legal reasons, there have been allegations made that say that it was planned by the UN and that they really intended to have the Arabs kill the Jews. Manuel A. Winston, Middle East analysis and commentator, stated, "United Nations never intended that the nation of Israel was to live very long." In her article, she brings up several facts to argue her point. One is that the land the UN gave to the Israelites was thin and hard to defend. The second is that the UN, hoping to reduce the conflict, placed an armed embargo. This would only have an effect on the Israel forces, as they were incredibly under-equipped compared to the other Arab nations. Winston's statement also corresponds with a diary entry made by the US President Harry Truman. I think the proper thing to do, and the thing I have been doing, is to do what I think is right and let them all go to hell. This quote shows Truman's dislike towards the Jews. This backs up Winston's belief in the arms embargo being used only to hinder the Israelites, as he would have not have been interested in reducing conflict. Whatever the case may have been, the UN's recommendations failed, as the Jews and Arabs went to war the day that Israel became a nation. The first Arab-Israelite war can be split into two, the pre-independence conflict and the post-independence conflict, as there was considerable battle between the two sides while the British were still in power. As soon as the UN passed resolution, fighting started out between the underground groups, which was followed by violent riots, and throughout conflict, the British did little to intervene. The Arabs had a leg up on the Jews until the Haganah, the main Jewish underground group, led a full-scale assault. Using an army of 1,500 people, they quickly took over, creating fear and panic with attacks on civilians. Terror attacks drove out the Palestinians. The Security Council blamed the Arabs for the conflict. Israel became a country on the 14th of May, and with that the surrounding Arab countries declared war. The Arab forces consisted of Arab armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. In comparison to the Israelites, they were superior in arms, numbers, and could easily resupply. The Israelites, however, had limited arms because of the UN embargo and had no supply lines as they were surrounded. The only things that the Israelites had over the Arabs was that they were far better trained and organised. The Arabs were winning until the first truce that the UN held in May 1948. The mediations did not bring peace for long, but did give the Israelites a chance to reorganise their war effort and rearm with third-hand weapons that had been smuggled from Eastern Europe. After the truce, the Israelites pushed back to the Arab invaders past the UN partition lines. There were a number of other short truces until 1949, when the Arab nations declared peace one by one. The war had horrible effects on either side. The Jews lost more men than any country and had an enormous amount of debt to deal with. The Arab countries had influxes of Palestinian refugees. Ever since the First War, there has been conflict in the form of either war or terrorism. There were another 3 wars fought between Israel and the Arab countries in which the Arabs were seeking revenge, but they all resulted in Israel taking more land. In 1946, the UN held talks in which Israel made peace agreements with the last of the warring countries and gave some land to create the nation of Palestine. Although even today there are still terrorist attacks from extremist groups on either side. The Palestinian-Israelite conflict is one of the UN's longest-running conflicts, and although there are no longer major wars, hundreds are still dying every year. The UN has been able to promote the creation of an Israelite homeland, but it did not personally create it. The UN has been able to create peace talks, but it has not created peace. Because the UN has no actual power, its solutions are just the recommendations of the international community, and this is no use in a conflict between two different-minded peoples. This is why the United Nations has only been capable of promoting peace in the Arab-Israelite conflict.